In this video, we'll talk about all the steps that you need to go through to glaze small ceramic pieces. I have various tools and supplies out that I will need for glazing. It's best to get out all of the work that you're going to glaze and all of the different tools that you'll need and materials that you'll need so you're ready to start the glazing process without having to run around and collect materials as you go. The different tools that I have are various brushes for various types of glaze application and wax application, and also oxide wash. I have the bisque ware that I will be glazing. I have a bucket of water and a small sponge. I've laid down newsprint to protect the table surface where I'm working to make sure that I don't get any wax on the table surface specifically, and also to make cleanup a lot easier. I have some various glazes that I'll be using that I pulled out of the glaze lab. You can glaze at your workstation by bringing the glazes to your workstation and then replacing them back in the glaze lab as soon as you're finished. I have whisks to mix up the glaze really well. I have a large cleanup sponge, a pencil, and I have some protective gloves. Each of our containers of glaze and different other surface application materials like oxide wash and slips, we have test tiles that give us an idea of what that glaze is going to look like. So it's a good habit to take a look at all the test tiles and use them to help you decide which glazes you want to use. Also, the glazes are labeled. And the most important thing for you to pay attention to is this cone 04. The cone and number tell us what temperature the glaze matures at. So for low fire, we use cone 04, 05, 06 glazes. The 0 indicates that it's low fire. For mid-range, we use cone 6 glazes, and for high fire, we use cone 10 glazes. It's extremely important that you choose the correct cone for the glaze firing that you're using. If you put low fire glazes in a high fire kiln, the glazes will melt so much that they run like water and they'll damage other work and the kiln shelves and your work. Everything will stick together. I also have a measuring cup so I can scoop glaze and pour into a piece or pour on the outside of a piece. And I have my glazing handout ready and at hand so I can follow along the steps and make sure I'm doing everything properly. So the first step in glazing is getting our bisque ware ready for the glaze. Most likely your bisque ware has some dust on it and it needs to be cleaned off before we can put glaze onto the bisque ware. If there's dust and dirt on your bisque ware, the glaze won't stick to it very well and it can cause glaze defects. So all we need to do is take our sponge, get it just damp. We want to wring the water out of it so it's not super wet. And then we're going to just wipe off inside and outside of our bisque ware. You don't want your sponge to be too wet. We want the bisque ware to be nice and dry when we apply glaze. The fact that the bisque ware is porous and dry helps the glaze stick to the surface before we put it into the kiln. If your pieces are wet, the glaze won't stick very well, or you won't get a thick enough application. So your ware should be dry and free of dust and dirt. When applying glaze to our pieces, we cannot have any glaze on the bottom of the piece or anywhere that your piece touches the kiln shelf or touches the table. One way that we can ensure that there's no glaze on the bottoms of our pieces is by applying wax resist to the areas of the piece that we don't want there to be any glaze. When applying glaze, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that we can't have any glaze on the very bottom of the piece. There can't be any glaze on the surface of your ceramic piece that touches the table or the kiln shelf. If there's glaze on the bottom here, it will melt and fuse and glue itself to the kiln shelf. So because glaze does melt and it can run, it can move down as it's melting, we want to give it a little bit of space. So we're going to make sure that we don't have glaze on the very bottom, but we're also going to come up about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch up the surface and make sure our glaze stops there so it has some room to move if it needs to. The way we can make a nice line that tells us where we need to wax and stop applying glaze is we can use a pencil and lay it flat on the table and draw a line around, keeping the pencil flat on the table, and that will give us a line that's about 1/8 of an inch off of the table surface. And there you can see if I apply wax to this surface and up to that line, then my glaze will stop there and it will be just enough to keep it from gluing itself to the kiln shelf. When applying wax, you should only use old brushes and you want to make sure you wash them out. I'll have this brush that says wax in the glaze lab for you. Be very careful when applying wax resist, as anywhere you get the wax, glaze will never stick there again. So when you're applying the wax, very carefully paint it only on the surface that you don't want there to be any glaze. Carefully come up to your line. You only need one thin coat of wax for it to resist the glaze. If you apply it too thick, it will take too long to dry. One thin coat should dry within 10 or 15 minutes. Now with a piece that has a foot ring, I can wax this surface and down to here. I can actually apply glaze here as long as this is at least 1/8 of an inch away from the table surface. So I just want to wax this very bottom part of the foot ring. Come up just a little bit on the interior, just that 1/8 of an inch. Wax can also be applied with a banding wheel. If you can get your piece right in the center of the banding wheel, use these rings to line it up. Wax resist can also be used as a decorating tool. Anywhere you paint it on your piece, the glaze will not stick. We can apply some wax to this surface and create some decoration, leaving the clay raw in those areas where you apply wax. Whenever using a brush for wax, it's important that we rinse it out as soon as we're done with the wax so the wax doesn't dry in the brush. If the wax dries in the brush, it ruins it and makes it so it's not usable any longer. So immediately come over to your water